Going to kick
Good.
us off?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm wereDr, the Director of Advancement for the PhD project, and I want to welcome you all. We're so glad you're here to join us tonight and continue this important conversation around diversity and inclusion in business and academe. Excuse me. Before we begin, I'd like to share just a little bit about the PhD project and some of our upcoming initiatives. The PhD project, as most of you know, takes a unique approach to creating a stronger, more diverse workforce. Since our founding in 1994, we've helped more than 1,300 Black, African Americans, Latinx, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans to earn a business PhD and pursue a career in higher education. Through our work on campuses across the country, the PhD project members not only educate, but they serve as role models and mentors for students who aspire to a career in the business world. Shortly, you'll meet just one of these amazing members, Dr. Oscar Holmes IV of Rutgers School of Business in Camden. As a first-generation college student, Dr. Holmes embodies our mission. In addition to his work as a professor, he also serves as an associate dean for undergraduate programs. He's a true role model to our community and a true friend to the PhD project. As part of the project's continuing evolution, we're excited to announce that we're going to be unveiling the next part of our rebranding this fall, with a new website. The journey was 18 months long in making, and we involved input from so many members, partners, and stakeholders. And I want to take this moment to thank everyone who helped us with our rebranding. This special moment marks an exciting chapter for the PhD project, so stay tuned. We can't wait to share our new website with you all. And a quick update, our 2021 conference will be virtual, the annual conference, November 17th through the 19th. If you're interested in pursuing a business PhD, there's still time to apply. The deadline is September 30th, and the application is available right on our website, phdproject.org. This event will give you a very honest look at the process of becoming a PhD and life as a faculty member. It also gives you a chance to connect with doctoral students, business school representatives, professors, and other members. So to apply again, it's phdproject.org. Finally, I'd like to just thank all of our corporate partners and our academic partners out there for their support. I know we have some representatives from the American Accounting Association, AICPA, and GMAC registered for tonight, so I think you're out there. I hope you're out there. Our partners are from a wide array of industries, so it's not just financial institutions. We have like technology firms and even consumer product companies like John Deere. So PhD project partners are able to connect with our professors to recruit on campuses throughout North America, and also to tap into experienced higher talent. So if you're with a company, or if you know of a company that would like to help us to build this pipeline, please contact me. Again, I'm wereDr. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. And we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to turn this over to Sasha Thompson with the equity equation to get the program started.
Thank you
Sasha.
so much, Marie. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sasha Thompson. I'm the founder of the Equity Equation, which is a diversity coaching and consulting firm in the Washington, D.C. area. And I am absolutely thrilled to have this conversation today. So just as a quick, before we start, I do want to acknowledge that today is Yom Kippur, a sacred holiday for those in the Jewish community. And many of our colleagues are attending memorial services and not able to join us for this discussion. So we want to wish them an easy fast and that they are sealed in the book of life. And we also want to acknowledge that yesterday was the start of Hispanic Heritage Month. And so we are thrilled to work with the PhD project. I know they have several activities and programs that are coming up as well. And if you need any support in that effort, please feel free to reach out to me as well at the Equity Equation. And so we are going to just dive right into our conversation today. And so just want to do quick introductions, but I'm going to have Oscar and Adrienne introduce themselves. And so we'll start with, well, let me do a quick introduction of our panelists. So Oscar Holmes is, again, Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs at Rutgers School of Business. And Adrienne Trimble is a Chief Diversity Officer at Sysco Corporation. So both of you, welcome to this conversation. So Adrienne, we'll start with you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why this topic is important for us to discuss today?
Certainly. Thank you, Sasha. And thank you so much for the invitation to join this very important discussion today. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for Sysco Corporation, the first Chief Diversity Officer that they've actually had in place. As I'm sure we've seen a number of companies across the country institute putting Chief Diversity Officers in positions to really drive their inclusion efforts. Prior to joining Sysco, I did serve as the President and CEO of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which is an organization, nonprofit, that connects minority certified businesses to corporate supply chain needs. I did that as an executive on loan, where I was working with Toyota and had been there for over 20 years, leading various areas such as human resources, supplier diversity, and then the broader diversity, equity, and inclusion for the North American enterprise. So this work is very near and dear to me, particularly around the economic inclusion and the economic impact of the work that we do and how it resonates both inside and outside the company. So thank you for allowing me to be here just to share a little bit of my insights about where we should sit in the organization to make the most impact.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. And Oscar, so you come from the academic side of this work. So tell us a little bit about yourself and, why is this important from your viewpoint?
Thank you so much, Sasha, for having me. And I am really honored to give back to the PhD project because the PhD project has given so much to me. And so just my short time in meeting you, Adrienne, I really appreciate sharing this panel with someone like you. So as Maurice mentioned before, I actually wear a lot of hats at Rutgers School of Business, Camden, and I don't like to say all of them because it sounds like a bit much and I get tired just listening to them. But on the professor side, right, as an associate professor, my main responsibilities are conducting high quality research. And much of the research that I investigate looks at how leaders can maximize productivity and well-being through fostering inclusive environments, right? And so outside of research, I'm teaching courses, whether it's to MBA students, exec ed, or undergraduate students, typically in the organizational behavior management area. And then also as a professor, we have to do a lot of service. And that's service to our university, but also service to our discipline. So I serve on a number of editorial review boards. I serve in the Academy of Management as an elected officer for the Organizational Behavior Division. But I also serve in a lot of DEI related roles on campus, including the co-chair of one of our DEI strategic committees. On the administrative side, right, as the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs, I'm responsible for all things dealing with undergraduate programs. So that's recruitment, that's curriculum issues, that's advising. And in addition to that, I founded a pipeline program called RUSE that basically tries to get underrepresented students interested in business at the high school level. So for 9 weeks, they come to campus, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students to compete in an entrepreneurship pitch competition, like a Shark Tank style pitch competition. And so I'm really excited about the work that I do there.
That's a lot. That's a lot. So before we dive into the conversation today, I do want to let the audience know we really want this to be interactive, right? So this is 3 folks, we're just having a conversation, but we want to get your voices in there too. So feel free to put questions in the chat, comment, hallelujah, whatever you want to do in the comment section, do that, because we want to make sure that we're also answering the questions that you have as a part of this discussion. And so, Oscar, I want to start with you. And, one of the things that we were talking about as we were prepping for this is no one has the right answer, right? Adrienne was saying, she's sat in both roles before, and we'll talk about that. But what is the research telling us? What is successful, right? What is that magic bullet?
That's a great question. And the research actually tells us very little on this topic, right? Because that question of whether or not a chief diversity officer should report to the CEO or report to other C-level functions, right? That's typically not a question that a lot of us would answer because it's very applied, right? It's not really theoretical in that sense. But what we do know from the data, the most relevant data that we have is about 69% of of chief diversity officers do report to some C-level executive, and about 39% of them do report to the CEO. And then the other balance of the next highest level is the chief human resource officer. I think the main takeaway from the data that we have that I would say is it's not really the reporting structure that matters per se in terms of who is successful and who isn't successful, because companies, organizations, whether they're for-profit, nonprofit, government organizations, they typically set up structures that work for them, or they copy structures that work for other companies, right? And so you will see a lot of times a lot of different reporting structures that may not make sense to people on the outside, but it makes sense for that particular company or that particular organization in that particular industry. So I wouldn't focus on necessarily, right, the reporting line per se. I will focus on whether or not the person who was hired for the role has the skills to be successful in the role. It also has the support and resources and staff so that they can carry out the objectives that are set for them, whether it's from the CEO, the chief human resource officer, or sometimes they report to the COO, right, of an organization, depending on how that organization decided to set up their C-level suite team.
Yeah, thank you. And Adrienne, when we were prepping again, you've sat in both roles, right? You can talk from both perspectives. So talk to us a little bit about your current setup, and then what you had before, and some of the what worked, or what some opportunities to improve in either one.
So as I mentioned, my discipline is human resources. So I've worked in HR, and I really was doing DEI work before it was called DEI work. It's really about just having fair, transparent, and open HR processes that allow full inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. So when I'm thinking about the role that I'm in today, I am reporting to the CHRO, and I'm very fortunate because the CHRO, he gets it. He is an advocate, he is a champion, he's there to help break down barriers that I might not be able to break down at my level in the organization. And he ensures that I get into the discussions as necessary to be able to have the impact that's needed. So to me, it kind of goes back to the point that Oscar made. If you have the right people in those roles, both from who you're reporting to and the person in the role who know how to navigate and maneuver through the organization, then that does not impede you from being able to get the work accomplished. And you can still be a part of those strategic discussions. Now, my previous role, I actually reported to the chief diversity officer who reported to the CEO. That person had a number of areas such as D&I, social innovation, philanthropy, mobility, all these other areas. So I was the lead executive for diversity. Mm-hmm. Reporting into the CEO had some challenges in that a lot of the data points that we needed to get, they did reside within HR. And sometimes that relationship was a little adversarial. We found some of our HR colleagues being a little protective of the information and wanting to execute those strategies themselves versus working alongside the D&I organization. So again, there can be some of those challenges. Now that I'm inside the organization, I'm able to kind of work with my colleagues. But the downside of being in the HR organization is that people see it only as a talent management strategy. And DEI is a business enabler. It really helps to connect the business, and it goes much broader beyond just talent. So that's some of the challenges that you have to kind of work through when you're kind of housed within the HR organization.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? Let's want to double click on that because, I came into DEI through I don't even know what we would call it these days, right? It was just kind of around outreach, right? And how do you pipeline development and those types of programs. And so that's kind of my background, which then morphed into marketing, right? How do you market? How do you get to understand these areas? So it was nothing about HR. It wasn't about talent management. It was, who are the audiences that you're trying to reach and what resonates with them, and how do you get them to be a part or to get included or even have access and opportunity, right? Depending on what I was developing. And so what I'm hearing from you is, beyond the talent management piece, there are pieces of diversity and inclusion that meet other aspects of the business. And so exactly. When it sits in HR, what are some of those missed opportunities?
So, and again, it goes back to the point we already talked about. It depends on the individual in that role. If it's just an HR professional, I don't want to say like just an HR professional, but if it's someone who has had limited experiences within the HR organization, that's going to be their go-to, right? versus if you have someone that has that broader view of the organization, such as your background, where you think about, you've done the community outreach aspects, you've done the marketing, the customer engagement, you can then understand how to partner with those C leaders of those business functions to be their advisor, to be there to give those business insights, to make sure that you're working and collaborating together. When you have folks who don't have that understanding of how DEI connects to the various areas, you lose those opportunities to really influence that business because you aren't really speaking their language. You aren't really you don't really understand their business challenges that they have because you are not part of that organization. And sometimes that's a missed opportunity for chief diversity officers if you don't have that access and if you are not respected in that way that you can be an advocate and an ally to those C leaders who are leading those other business functions.
Thank you. And so the question just came in. So I'm going to go to Oscar. You're on the hot seat.
Sure.
So given that higher education institutions are siloed into academic and student affairs, and that those operating officers tend to be the most influential after the chancellor, after the chancellor or president, how would you structure a DEI office to be most effective?
So thank you, Jose, for that question. Good to see you. I kind of disagree a little bit with you, Jose. I don't think that the student affairs side is as influential as the academic side of the house in academia. So I'll just push back a little bit on that. But the next part of your question is about where should this person sit? Like, as you know, in academia, which is why I don't really focus on reporting structures anyway, because a lot of us, it's like, I don't care what the lines say on the chart. We don't report to anybody, right? That's how academia works a lot. So, it depends on how the organization wants to structure that role, right? So if you are school focused, right, then that person will probably sit in the dean's cabinet of that school, for example, the business school, right? But if the person is hired into the role to work across the different schools, then the person will probably sit at the president's level, right? Because that person has the charge to work across the different schools that are on a campus. So it really depends on, where you want to bring this professional in terms of, salary and scope of your particular school. But again, I mean, you have to have a lot of skills and influence and know the right people and be able to speak the language of different schools if you're in academia, because, we don't respond well to this whole hierarchy thing. You have to do a lot of interpersonal influence in academia, which gives me a really great perspective, right? Because just as being associate dean of the undergraduate programs, like, I just can't use that title to get stuff done, even though, because a lot of people who don't report to me, but they work with the undergraduate program. So they have to get the things that I want done. So I have to be really strategic about how I can influence them. And so I think, it would depend on, from a university standpoint, just where you want to put this person and the scope of the job that you want them to work in. If it's school focused, then they probably would sit in the dean's cabinet. But if it's university focused, then they probably would sit in the chancellor or president's cabinet.
Thank you for that. And so, listening to both of you kind of talk at it from both perspectives, I'm hearing two themes. One is about how effective someone can be in the role, but then also I'm hearing how the role is respected, right, within the organization. And so, Adrienne, can you talk a little bit about the importance of that? Because when I'm seeing, right, a lot of folks, as you said at the top of this, lots of roles are out there, right? But are they doing it as a reaction to, the last 18, 20 months? Or are they really invested in making change happen, systemic change happen within the organization? And so can you talk a little bit about, the importance of the respect as well as the effectiveness?
Absolutely. So I'm going to say something that's probably a little controversial, and some of my peers may not appreciate it, but I'm just going to put it out there. I don't know if folks have been keeping up, but it seems like it's almost like a musical chairs of chief diversity officers. They are moving like from company to company to company. And to me, that signals a deeper problem, right? So one is that, there are some companies that are lowering some of the, more seasoned, experienced CDOs away as they're trying to jumpstart or elevate their efforts, and which creates a gap. And then you have the next person coming behind them. But it goes to the point that you just raised. How effective can you be if you're only there 18 months, 2 years, and then you're on to the next one? So it's kind of like that, when you think about it, how much respect and I call it, that social capital can you really build upon if you're moving so quickly before you can truly make a deep impact into that organization. So when you talk about the effectiveness of it, you have to be positioned so that your thoughts, your advice, your counsel is sought after by those other C-suite individuals. And that comes by understanding their business, understanding their challenges, understanding what problems they're trying to solve, and how can you help, how does DEI help solve those problems? And I'll give you a great example of that. So when I first joined Sysco, one of the first things that we implemented was a DEI, we call it DEI scorecard for our C-suite leaders. And essentially it measures their process in 3 areas: their personal leadership and accountability, what they do in terms of their personal actions, walking the walk. The second is their talent management. How are they managing their talent pipeline, their succession planning, things of that nature. The third is their business partnerships, from supplier diversity to who they partner with in the community. So all 3 of those we're measuring. We have very specific metrics around what they say they're going to do, and then we're going to measure them against what they're going to do. Well, one of our leaders said to me as we were rolling this out, he says, how can you tell me what my goal should be if you don't even know what problems I'm trying to solve in my organization? And I said, I'm not here to solve your problems from that perspective. I'm here to give you tools, resources, counsel, advice on how we can work together to understand what those problems are and how this process will help you to solve them, whether that's around talent pipeline, whether that's around the suppliers or the vendors that we're using. How do we make sure that we're bringing innovation, we're bringing cost competitiveness to the supply chain, because you're bidding things out versus just giving contracts to the people who've always had them. Those are some of the things that I was able to talk about. And once I was able to rattle those off, he was like, okay, she knows about my whole business. So you have to be able to speak that language to them and get in the trenches with them and help them to understand that you are a resource to help them solve problems.
Thank you. And as you were talking, what also came to me was probably part of that merry-go-round that we're seeing is folks getting into roles where it's like, oh, you said one thing, but when I get in here, the processes and systems are not set up for my success, right? Mm-hmm. And the resources, as Oscar said, the resources aren't in place to ensure that I'm successful. So Oscar, I want you to talk a little bit about that, right? It's you got a good game, you talk good game.
Right, and in fact, so that another recent report stated that many CDOs found out that what they thought they were going to do in the role really changed after they took the role. So that part of that is due to some of the moving around that you see CDOs do to different places, because it's like a bait and switch. You said you were going to give me all of this, but then they didn't follow through. So, we always say, like, a lot of people, a lot of organizations, they have this champagne taste, but they have, beer budgets, and you can't make magic out of nothing, right? Like, CDOs aren't magic makers. They have to have the resources. So, I think Adrienne made a great point about realizing you need to have time to really form relationships and sit in a place to see the change that you're going to make. But the other part of it is on the organization. You have to provide the resources and structure in place so that these people can be successful. You have to, as a CEO, also talk to your other C-suite team, so that you are backing this person up. I shouldn't have to go in and try to really earn all of the respect of my C-suite team, right? Like, you also need to advocate in the CEO or CEO so that they can see you immediately, which is, in the university setting, I had to talk about language and how we use language with my team members, right? And this whole idea, this is the diversity hire, because we have a lot of diversity initiatives coming through. And I have to say, wait a minute, we can't use that type of language, right? Of course, we want to hire more underrepresented faculty members, right? But we can't use the diversity hire label, because you're already going to pigeonhole these people to not be successful. So the resources there in the CDO, but this person also needs to make sure that the C-suite team see them as a resource, but also see them at the same level, if they're sitting at that level, if that was the goal of the organization when they brought that person in.
That's the key point. That was the goal, right? So one of the questions that came in is the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business enabler is a fantastic one. With that in mind, what is the business case for DEI from an academic's and a practitioner's perspective?
I laugh. I laugh because for those who know me in academe, right, they know I have been really vocal about shutting down the business case for diversity and moving away from the business case for diversity. And I realized, I mean, I totally understand. I recognize why we have it. I know, businesses, they that's the language they speak. They want to see money. But I do find it really insulting, right, when we particularly lead with business case and think that that is the best way to talk about DEI. Because one, from the research standpoint, we constantly hear all the time the positive benefits about diversity. But from a research standpoint, there are actually mixed results, right? Diversity doesn't always lead to positive results for organizations. So there's a lot of factors that organizations need to put in place to receive the benefits of diversity. We know that from a research standpoint. But typically in media, it's just boiled down to diversity is great for organizations, right? That's a lot that goes into to make sure that diversity benefits an organization. But I always bring it back to why is it for me or you, Adrienne, or you, Sasha, why is it for people like us, we have to prove to an organization that we can give them above average returns if they hire us? Like, an organization should hire us because that's just the right thing to do. They need to hire us. And when we think about our history, organizations didn't care that it cost them more money, right, to build separate facilities so that African-American people can wait here in this waiting room, call it only waiting room, or, they couldn't eat there. They were turning away money. So they didn't care when they lost money, when they didn't serve these organizations, or they had to spend more money to make different schools, right, versus just having an integrated school. So to me, it's insulting now in 2021 that you want to talk about, oh, we got to make money. When we look at our history, the organizations didn't care about that, right? So I push back on the business case in academia and in corporations because I just don't think it's the right case to make. And for the simple fact is also when we do look at the research, so for example, my dissertation chair, Derek Avery, they did great research and they found that race matching, for example, right, it's beneficial for organizations. So for example, if you are a retail company and if you are in neighborhoods where there's a certain type of clientele, you actually get benefits if you hire people who look like those people in those neighborhoods. But here's the problem with that, right? I'm not criticizing my chair's research, right? I'm just saying what's the problem, the real problem with that. When you are an underrepresented person and you are matched with other underrepresented groups of people, the clients, those people, meaning people like me, right? We're not the fast track to the top level in organizations, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a fundamental problem when you do that. If you think about real estate, if you think about, the legal field, if I'm a realtor and I'm only able to sell to other African Americans, then automatically my commissions are going to be lower because we know the type of neighborhoods that African Americans buy in. So the commissions are going to be lower for them. Same thing if you're a banker, if you're not dealing with clients that are high net worth, which are typically white people, right, you're not going to receive those benefits. So even when we have research to show that this is a particular tactic that is beneficial for an organization, it doesn't mean it's the right thing for an organization to do if you look at the broader idea of what is fair in an organization.
Can I jump in on that? Because I'm actually dealing with that completely right now. So when I'm looking at, for instance, in Sysco's organization, our sales consultants, we keep saying we want to hire people who represent the communities and where we're doing business, right? But what you said is exactly what the sales consultants brought up. They said those accounts tend to be the smaller margins, which impact my bonus, which impacts my incentives. So how do we address that? So that's problem number one that I've already started to look at. And so when you start thinking about it, you're right. It's not just about the business case and having people who represent that community. to me, I go back to the economic impact of our overall US economy and making sure that we're creating jobs in communities that are typically underserved and underrepresented, and that those jobs then create that disposable and discretionary income so that these folks can go out to eat, they can go buy cars, they can afford to send their kids to college. It's about that bigger picture and helping people understand that. And then you try to funnel down, okay, if this is what we're doing to help drive our economic engine for our country, this is to me, that becomes the bigger business case of why we're doing this. So it's not so pigeonholed in terms of just trying to do the transactional business of the day. It's about the broader thinking of the impact of DEI.
I agree.
Yeah. And and that again goes back to because I am biased. I will admit that I'm biased. Like, I don't believe DEI belongs in HR because of what you just said. And I think HR is a phenomenal partner in this, right? As far as the talent process piece internally, but that economic engine piece that you just talked about and the impact around on the community, and it's just so much broader. Right. And so I think that, there is an opportunity, regardless of where this role sits, though I am biased, that companies can do this in a way that is beyond just numbers and butts and seats. Right. It is, how do you impact your industry and the lives of those that are in the communities around you? So, one of the things that, we had talked about is, how can I phrase it? Everyone wants to be a part of this diversity thing, right? And so you're seeing this uptick in diversity roles. I think I read an article the other day that said in the last 16 months that there's been an 86% increase in the number of roles that are available around diversity and inclusion. And so as we're doing this, what are some of the things that companies really need to take into consideration, right, as they're bringing these roles on? It's not just to say, yes, hey, that team over there, they're in charge of diversity and inclusion. What are some of the things that they need to take into consideration as they're bringing these teams on or hiring these folks in? And I think you touched on it a little bit, both of you, around resources. But what else is there? And I'm just going to throw that out to both of you.
I'll start, Oscar.
Oh, go ahead.
You can jump in with some of the data points to support it. But when I think about, first of all, I tell everyone, I am not the diversity lady. That is not my job. That is not my role. I do not own diversity, equity, and inclusion for any corporation. That is owned by the leadership. That leadership sets the culture, sets the tone, sets the expectations for how their people behave in the organization. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I think Oscar hit this really well earlier, you cannot put people in these roles and not give them the resources, the funding, the exposure, the visibility, and then wonder why they're not being successful. There has to be some commitment made. And I saw somebody in the comments say this. It's actually starting to be driven from the top of the house. And that's these boards of directors, the boards of trustees who are now really doubling down on this. But I would challenge you to understand why. I don't think it's because all these folks just all of a sudden woke up and said, this is something we should be doing. It's because now you look at investor relations. What are they talking about? They're talking about ESG, and investors are now making it part of their plan in terms of which companies they're going to invest in, those accountability metrics. It's a much broader discussion than it's ever been. So when you start thinking about why all these companies now are starting to jump on the bandwagon, it's because of shareholder returns, shareholder expectations, and that portfolio. So that's what I'm seeing from the corporate side, which is why you're now seeing not only is this being driven inside organizations, but look at the big push to get more people of color, particularly on boards of directors in public companies. That's because there's a much broader conversation here. It still goes back to me to the economics of the whole conversation around DEI.
So the only thing that I would add to what Adrienne brilliantly shared was that, one, companies need to just set realistic goals for the people they put in these roles, right? They need realistic goals. And again, that goes to the champagne, taste, but a bigger budget that they have. And if you don't set realistic goals and the time horizon for these goals, you're setting that person up for failure, right? You cannot expect, again, a chief diversity officer to just make magic. Right. And then the second thing that the organizations, they really need to do is understand that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I know it was really, I'm gonna be real with you all. I just lost my train of thought right
That's
there.
all right. We'll get back to it. We'll get back to it.
I know it'll come back to me, sure,
As
certainly.
soon as it does, just jump right in.
Right.
We'll be fine. You
I
know,
like what I think Finesse said, it's not microwavable, right? DEI is not microwavable.
But I think what you said is so key, and it's something actually, this is my first chief diversity officer role for a, Fortune 60 company, right? So stepping into the door. And I hear people say all the time, you got to meet companies where they are. I agree with that, but you also have to move them along. You can't just say we're going to meet them where they are. To your point, set the goals, set realistic goals. And then that senior leadership team and that leadership team, they need to activate against achieving those goals. We're here to be the partners, help roll up the sleeves, work alongside them. But you have to make sure that that team is held accountable because they run the business. So how do you make sure that you have that ability to work alongside them as their partner, but you're not the one that's sitting there holding the bag saying, okay, I own this. And when we don't achieve these goals, I failed as a chief diversity officer. No, it's a partnership. So making sure that we're both aligned in terms of what is realistic, what are those goals, what are those short-term goals and those long-term goals, and that there's accountability. And to me, that accountability is when you report out externally to your consumers, your customers, your stakeholders, whoever those are, and to your board on a regular cadence, so that people understand that what you say you're going to do actually gets done and is measured.
okay, y'all got my mind spinning right now because there's just so much that y'all just touched on that I want to go back to, and I'm looking at the chat as well. And so I want to go back to something Oscar said around, the champagne taste on the beer budget, and how there's so much emphasis put on recruiting. Like for the last 18 months, it's been, we need to recruit, we need to recruit, we need to recruit. Anybody that follows me on social media will know that the thing I'm going to say is the best recruiters, if you're treating your people right, you can fire your recruiting team because your employees will be your best recruiters, right? And so that investment, it's a smaller investment to invest in the folks that you have than to hire, right? And so as we're having this conversation, and I know this is a little bit off script, but it was something that did come up in the chat, we're seeing this push for recruiting, but what efforts are or should be put in place around retention, right? Around investing in promotion, investing in leadership development, because it's not there, right? Or it's very little. So yeah, I'm gonna throw that out, y'all.
Yeah.
Just hear what you have to say about that, because I have some thoughts too.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, Sasha, because that made me think about what I was going to say when I lost my train of thought. It comes around recruitment, right? So another thing that I wanted to add just to the last point that the organizations need to do, they need to be realistic in terms of the realistic goals that they set, but also not try to pull a fast one on people. And Adrienne talked about that accountability piece in terms of the metrics. And this is what I mean by, a lot of organizations trying to pull a fast one on people. So, diversity, particularly when we think about when it comes to social identity groups, people, gender, race, ethnicity, things like that. That's a group level characteristic. So organizations can increase diversity and report those numbers out, but not do anything for underrepresented group members. And that's what I see happens in a lot of these organizations when they, post their numbers. And so just for example, I'm the only African-American tenure track faculty members at my business school, not talking bad about my business school, just stating the facts, right? But our diversity numbers are really high because we have professors from all over the world. And that nature diversity looks really good, but we have 0 Hispanic American business school faculty members, 0 Native Americans, and only 1 African American. So if I'm leaders of organizations, I can increase my diversity numbers and make them look good, but not touch underrepresented group members. And that's a different conversation between, do I just want to increase the racial ethnic diversity of my organization, or do I specifically want to target underrepresented group members and increase those numbers? And so a lot of organizations are savvy, right, by trying to pull fast ones on a lot of people when they mask what diversity really means in these reports. Now, to your other point about recruitment, I think organizations should invest as much or even more in the recruitment effort, right? And we see that on the academic side and in corporate America. we see a lot of people come in, but they don't stay for a variety of reasons that if the organization put that investment in them, they could have retained them.
Mm-hmm. You know, and so what I'm hearing from you is, and I said this to a client today, we're focused on the numbers, right? Diversity is a number. The inclusion piece is what keeps people in an organization. And so someone, said to me not too long ago, an organ will reject a body if it's not prepared for it. And so you're trying to bring folks in to an environment that might not be ready for them. And so what does that look like? And I just now lost my train of thought.
Well, while you're
rub it off.
I want to touch on what Oscar said, though, because what he said was just so key. And to me, and so I'm just going to be real. I stopped using that whole vernacular of people of color. Let's do the real analysis of where are the true opportunities to increase representation for those that have been traditionally underutilized and underrepresented. So how do you have those conversations? You use those drivers based on what the data tells you. Everything, it's a data conversation. So let's look at it and kind of measure it that way. When you start looking at the recruitment versus retention, it's really both. You have to focus on both of those. And so I'll give you guys an example. I was having conversations, and you guys know right now we're in the food services industry, Sysco is, and staffing challenges are significant. We can't get enough people in the door. Well, the whole organization is like staffing is a number one priority. And what I said to me and my team is ours is going to be retention, because look at the numbers. We're bringing all these people in, and at the bottom, they're all just going right back out the door. Yep. So that to me, that's a cost issue. That's a culture issue. I mean, all of those things. So we're going to try to figure out if you're going to make this type of investment to get people in the door, and the metrics look really good. We're over-indexed now on Blacks. We're over-indexed now on Hispanics and women in the right area. So we're doing the right things at the front, but we don't want to have to turn around a year later and replace those individuals, because to me, that's just, that's a significant amount of cost that we're losing out on. So how do we understand what those true issues are? And I think someone said that in the comments. How do we focus on what those culture issues are, what the challenges are, and hold leadership accountable? So when I started looking at my plan for the year and where my focus was going to be, it's going to be on leadership development, because to me, they are the front line folks working with their people that impact whether a person stays with the organization or not. You've all seen the studies. People don't typically leave organizations. They leave managers. They leave leaders. So how do we make sure that our leadership is equipped to be able to keep the talent that we're bringing in?
Yeah.
And if I could just add to that, Sasha, real quick, I would say that the executives at organizations, or either, academics, if it's a university setting, they need to leave this idea of a zero-sum mindset, right? If I give you something, I'm going to lose something. And since I teach negotiation, it's always a win-win. You can find a win-win. And so the entire zero-sum mindset is really detrimental in DEI.
Yes, love it. So I want to get to one of the questions that's in the chat. So the question is, can Oscar and Adrienne discuss what the organizational structure associated with a credible DEI organization looks like? A lot of CDOs have no direct reports and no budget and are expected to deliver.
That's a false narrative right there. It's a non-starter. Seriously, it's a non-starter. So, and I'm just going to be, again, very candid. When I came into Sysco, there was one person sitting in the DEI office, and I was very candid up front. I will put together my business case, and I will build this function, and I will make sure that it has the resources, as long as you make sure that you're committed to supporting what we agreed to is going to be necessary. And I've told them, I'm going to give you 3 different examples. Here's what we can do if you want to be mediocre. Here's what we can do if you want to be good. And here's what you do if you want to be a leader. You pick. I can build whatever you want. I can build you, as I tell people, I can build you a Toyota, or I can build you a Lexus. You tell me which one you want, and I will give you those resources. So to your point, we got to make sure that these roles are staffed, because to me, that's a sign of commitment. If the organization is not investing in the DEI infrastructure, they are not serious about really moving the needle.
Yeah.
Nothing further to add to that. That was perfect. That was perfect. I mean, you got to have the right team with you.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came in, Oscar, would be for you is, as a public university that cannot directly target minority groups, what are some ways that someone in this role can do that?
So I'm at a public institution as well, right? And it's not that we can't target groups, minority groups or whatever, because we certainly do cluster hires and we make it known that we're doing cluster hires to increase underrepresentation. And so cluster hiring has been an effective thing in academia to increase underrepresented faculty members. So even as a public institution, we do that, and it's possible. But another thing we have found in the research is just the way that you write your ads and where you place those ads really make a difference. So if you are putting language into your ads where you encourage or strongly encourage underrepresented minorities to apply, that language sends different signals to people. Now, obviously, we know sometimes when we get to the organization, it's a different story. Like they sold us a bill of goods.
Yeah.
But the language really matters. And in fact, there's an online tool that you can actually submit your job ad to, and it will tell you if it's more female leaning or male leaning, right? So again, use the tools that we have available for people to just run your ads through those things and get other eyes on it so that you can write really attractive ads that will speak to the targeted group that you are trying to hit. And in this person's case, it was underrepresented minorities. And so we know the type of language that will get a second look from someone like me versus my white counterpart. Right?
Thank you. So hopefully that answered the question. So a couple of other questions that have come in. So should we do something about the fact that many DEI professionals are precarious at-will employees asked to facilitate uncomfortable conversations? If so, what should we do?
I guess I need a little bit more context around that question. I guess what I'm thinking about, so if you're asked to facilitate those uncomfortable conversations and you are equipped to do so, that's where resources and investment become so important. That person has to be empowered to be able to go get the resources that's going to help them be able to deliver on that ask. One of the things that I thought was really interesting before I joined Sysco, right after the George Floyd situation happened last summer, and all these companies started, really doubling down on their racial equity issues, the company implemented these sessions called Real Talk, and it's where leaders would just bring their groups together in an informal manner, just talk about how are you responding to these issues, what would you like to see? And a lot of companies did this, right? The question I sat back and asked was, how did you prepare these people to have this conversation? We're not all counselors. What type of tools and resources are we using? Now, fortunately, they did partner with a third party to kind of set the framework for that. But to the point that was made earlier, if you are a one-person show and you don't have budget and you don't have resources, that's setting someone up for failure, because again, the beauty of it is it should be the leaders having those conversations. We work alongside to give them the tools, resources. It should not be the DEI person going around having all these uncomfortable conversations to make other people feel more comfortable. No, they have to have that accountability.
And I would just add to that this is where consultants really play a huge role. And so I also consult for organizations as well. And I think when it comes to these conversations like this, particularly if the person is in a vulnerable situation of being in employment at will, you really have to rely on consultants. Even if you have the expertise, we're not questioning your expertise at all, but people just receive things differently if it's from a legitimate person who comes from the outside.
Yeah. I was facilitating a session today, and Adrienne, you touched on exactly what one of the people in the session said was, as managers, like, we know how to manage, but not around this. We haven't been given the resources or tools to talk about these specific topics. And so it's hard, especially when you're in a culture that these are the topics, these are taboo topics. We don't talk about race or religion or sexual orientation or disability, right? We don't have those conversations. And now all of a sudden you want to have these real talks and courageous conversations, and people aren't equipped to do that. And so, I was in an organization where we brought in trauma specialists to talk about, okay, what does trauma look like? What does racial trauma look like? And how does that play out in the body, right? And show up in the workplace. And so having those type of conversations, as Oscar was saying, about third party alleviates a lot of that pressure and that stress. You know, one of the things that I want to make sure that we touch on in this, because Oscar, you talked about third parties and relationships, is how can academia and the corporate space work together in this? And I'll throw it out to both of you, Oscar, if you could start. But I think that there is a sweet spot, right, for these conversations to happen in a more meaningful way. So I would love to hear from you on that.
Absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, Sasha, it is definitely, we have a sweet spot. We have amazing opportunities to partner along this. Obviously, you know, when we think about professional roles, the students who we are educating are going on to these organizations, right? So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we train students to have a good level of competency in DEI, which is one of the reasons why I am strongly trying to have a DEI course that's mandatory for our business students to take at Rutgers School of Business. Right now, we don't have one, but that's something that I want to try to push through while I'm in this role as associate dean, right? But on the other side of it, I think, you know, there's so many academics who do research, myself included, right, in this field. And a lot of doors get shut. Like, I have spent a lot of time with organizations and I write these really holistic study plans and things. And then I get to the legal officer, because they have to pass it through legal. And they're like, no, we can't ask those questions, right? And so we do amazing research in the field. And we have to have organizations to continue to do this research. But, you know, the CEOs and other C-suite people have to sit down with their legal teams and say, you can't just keep blocking, you know, all of the things that you know, these researchers want to do, because we can answer a lot of questions for you. We just have to have the access. And I have had more than my fair share of no's. Like other people are really excited about it, but then he got to the legal team and they was like, no, you know, if we ask our employees these questions or we bring these type of things up, then, you know, it's going to be major issues for us, or we can get sued, or, you know, all of those things. I'm not denying that these may not be legitimate from an attorney's perspective, right? But there are a lot of ways that we can get to the heart of the issues of these organizations using really the tools that we have as scientists, like as social scientists, that I don't think we are partnering up enough. And the other thing I would say, when we do get in, what I find is there tends to be a bias to just open up your doors for, say, like top 20 schools, right? So the big name brand schools, when sometimes some of the people may not even have the expertise, right? It's just that, oh, I'm bringing somebody in from Harvard, right? Versus, you know, another professor at a state flagship school may have even more expertise, but they don't want to be affiliated with that. So those are two ways that I think that we can help this partnership. And then finally, you know, I'm just going to say, if you're not already involved, you gotta be a partner with the PhD project, right? The PhD project is doing the lion's share of the work of increasing the diversity for these organizations, not just in academia, but also for these corporations, because we are bringing these students in and graduating them. And, you know, whatever your fee is at your level, depending on where you are, you don't have to stay there, right? You can always give above what it costs to be a sponsor for the PhD project. So just don't do the bare minimum, go above and beyond. And that will pay dividends in terms of the partnership that academia and corporations can have in increasing diversity.
Yeah, you know, Oscar, but Adrienne, before you jump in, the legal barrier, and this is a whole other webinar for another time, is legal stuck in compliance, right? That's 1980s DEI. Right? Legal is stuck there. And so we're now in this 21st century world, and the legal teams within a lot of these organizations have not done the work on themselves, because there's a lot of internal bias with individuals. That's a whole other topic. But I think that's one of those blockers for sure, is that compliance is kind of driving this. And when there's fear around these topics, it's okay, legally, what can we do versus legally, what's the most we can do before it's illegal?
Right. And they don't have a lot of accountability, right? Because, I mean, one of my really good colleagues is an employment lawyer, right, who does DEI work. And so, they just shut down things when in fact it's like, okay, there's no one else on the team, right, who could challenge their legal perspective.
Yep. Yeah. So Adrienne, I want to get your voice in there.
So I'm actually just sitting here listening, kind of chuckling because as I told you guys, when I came into the organization, I only had one resource, and there was someone that was leading our Black Associate Resource Group who's actually an employment attorney that I brought onto my team for kind of to help me get the DEI function kind of up and structured. And so, we are a government supplier, so we do have affirmative action plans in place. And so we were looking at how we can start doing research to understand how do we develop a talent pipeline that matches the communities where we serve, all around those numbers and the metrics, right? And so one day she says to me, "Oh, we can't do that. That's illegal. We can't set quotas." I said, "Okay, there are two things that we're going to talk about here. Number one, we're not setting quotas. We're setting, goals that help us to kind of understand what our workforce should look like. And number two, this is not a legal or compliance issue. This is a business strategy that's going to help our business to be better." So I think you're absolutely right. We've got to get to our legal folks to help them understand we're not just trying to be compliant. We want to understand what the risks are, and then we'll make the best informed decision on how we want to proceed based on the risks that you've outlined. And if we still think it's the best thing for the business that's going to move us forward, then that's what we're going to do. Understanding that, yes, we appreciate that legal counsel, but this is what we've decided for the business.
Thank you. So we have 3 minutes left, and I always end these conversations with, if there were 1 or 2 nuggets that you wanted folks to walk away with, what would they be?
Adrienne, you go first on that one.
Oh, you would do that. You would do that.
And I didn't even hit y'all with my big question, but we'll stick it with that.
No, well, if they're, I always like to, I think in terms of 3, so I will leave with 3 points. So the first is that if you are a newly appointed chief diversity officer and you're stepping into an organization that has never had a CDO in place before, the first thing I would say is do that cultural assessment. Understand what the challenges are, and not just from a talent perspective, but do an overall organizational assessment. Call it a listening tour, call it whatever you want, but look at what your data is telling you so that you can make your business strategies or your proposals based on where the pain points are in the organization. The second thing is, I know we started this conversation around structurally, where should the CDO sit? And what I would say is that right now, I think as Oscar's research says, the majority of CDOs sit within HR. So that's the structure. You've got to learn how you work around that so that you don't get buried in the HR organization, but you use it to be a springboard to get you into the rooms, have that CHRO get you into the rooms where those conversations are taking place so that you can be effective and be that advisor, because the CHRO is looking at HR issues. The CDO is looking at broader business issues. So how do you make sure that you keep that front of mind? And then the third thing that I would leave folks with is look at the data and follow the data. It's not really about the business case, but put your metrics in place, ensure that there's accountability and that you are reporting them out internally and externally, because that adds an extra layer of accountability that will help you get the support and resources that you need. Because I think I tell people this all the time. In my previous role at Toyota, the diversity and inclusion was always a business priority, but it became a high business priority when you had someone like Reverend Jesse Jackson outside your dealerships boycotting your products because you were not doing the things that you should be doing. So make sure you have the internal and external accountability built.
Thank you. Oscar, what are your nuggets?
I'll follow up with 3 quick ones. A lot of people use the phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I don't even use that phrase because a marathon ends, right? DEI never ends. So you're constantly growing. You're constantly having to update your competencies and knowledge. There is no end game to this. There's not a day in my life that I'm going to be bias free, right? I have blind spots, so I constantly need to work on myself. So as an organization, you need to know that this is not a marathon that's going to end after the 26 miles, right? It's the long game. I don't even use game because games end, right? There's no end to this. It's infinite. The second thing is, again, I would say changing the mindset. This is not, you can't have a zero-sum mindset and thinking you're going to get any, productive results from it. You got to think of it as a win-win solution. And then finally, again, harping on the business case, do this for the right reason, not to just line your pockets.
Thank you both. And I didn't even get to, the juicy question of, what if the chief diversity officer was the head and HR reported in there, right? Like, woo. And then I think we were talking about if the officer reported into the board. So there's just so much, and again, it goes back to what you both were saying around structure and the importance of the role. So this could be an ongoing conversation. And so I just want to thank you both for your time and just everything that you shared with us today. The comments are on fire, so I'm loving that because there's just so many questions out there. But again, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this conversation, and thank you for joining us. We will have our next webinar next month. And so the PhD project and the equity equation will be pushing that title and registration link out to you in the coming weeks. So again, I want to wish everyone a wonderful evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you. And we'll see you next week. Next month. All right.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.